The black bride was stoned at the estate. The groom's family did it without regret. But the Korean Mafia boss claimed her and made them regret it all. Hana Adeyemi married into the Choi family to save her father's company. They never wanted her there, not for one single day. 3 days before the wedding, they invited her to a blessing at the family estate. 40 guests came in silk and diamonds. Stones wrapped in flowers waited for her in the garden. One by one, they threw them. They called it tradition. Nobody on that terrace moved to stop it. She went down in the wet grass, bleeding, alone. Then a stranger walked out of the dark. The Choi family had no idea who they had just let onto their land. 3 days later, they found out. By then, it was already too late. Welcome to Afro Mafia Romance Chronicles. If you're already feeling some type of way about this family, good. Hit subscribe right now. Drop a comment. If you think they deserve everything that's coming, then let's get into exactly how it happened. Before any of this happened, before Seoul, before the Chois, there was a little girl in Lagos who thought her father could fix anything. Adeyemi John built things for a living. Bridges, office towers, the kind of buildings that stood up straight for 50 years without complaint. Every Saturday, without fail, he took Hana to whatever site he was working that month. He set a hard hat 2 sizes too big on her head. He let her stand beside him while he checked a foundation. "You don't ask if it's beautiful first," he told her, more times than she could count. "You ask, will this hold? Beauty comes after." She believed him completely. She still does. At home, after the cranes went quiet for the day, he'd sit with her at the kitchen table while she copied his blueprints onto scrap paper. He corrected her hand without ever once making her feel small for getting it wrong. He called her his junior architect before she could spell the word. He kept every drawing she ever gave him, folded into a drawer in his office. Even the bad ones. When she got into architecture school in London, he cried at the airport. He pretended it was something in his eye. When she sent him photos of her first real project, a small community library, nothing fancy, he printed one out and pinned it to his office wall, right next to a photo of her at 6 years old, drowning in that oversized hard hat. He was the kind of father who called just to hear her voice. The kind who remembered which buildings she'd mentioned liking months later. He'd bring them up out of nowhere, because he'd been thinking about her the whole time. He got sick the winter Hana turned 26. Quietly, the way he did everything. He didn't tell her how bad it was until there wasn't much time left to soften it. She flew home and sat with him for 11 days. On the last one, his hand in hers, he told her not to worry about the company. He told her some debts were just words men said to feel even with each other. He told her she shouldn't carry weight that wasn't hers to carry. He died believing that. He was wrong. That is the kind of father Adeyemi John was. And it's the reason Hana never once hesitated when a letter arrived from a Seoul law firm. 6 weeks before 40 strangers stood in a garden and threw stones wrapped in flowers at his only daughter. She was in London, going through his old paperwork one last time, when that letter actually came. Years before Hana was born, his company nearly collapsed, and a wealthy Korean businessman quietly saved it, on one condition. If his family ever needed something from the Adeyemis, the debt would be repaid, no matter how much time passed. Her father agreed instantly. He believed, in his heart, that day would never come. He was wrong. The Choi family had inherited that old contract through a tangle of business deals nobody outside a boardroom could follow, and the final line of the letter was simple. Her father had promised his daughter's hand in marriage to save his company. Now, with him dead, and the company struggling again, the Chois were calling in that promise. Hana could have said no. She had her own career, her own life in London. But 40 employees depended on her father's company staying open. 40 families. So 3 weeks later, she packed one suitcase and flew to Seoul, telling herself this was temporary, a formality, a year, maybe 2, and then a quiet end to it. Hana had no idea what she was walking into. She had no idea that somewhere in that same city, a man she hadn't seen in 14 years had already heard her name, and was already watching. A junior architect named Juan was the only person in Seoul who treated Hana like a person instead of a problem to manage. They worked late together over blueprints more nights than not, the air conditioning humming, cold coffee going untouched between them. You know everyone at that house treats you like a guest who overstayed her welcome, Joan said one night, not looking up from the drawings. My aunt worked events for families like the Choi once. She told me something. The wealthiest families in this city are the most dangerous. Not because they carry weapons, because they've spent generations learning how to destroy a person and still get invited to nice parties afterward. Hana laughed, tired. It's not that bad. Joan finally looked up. They call you the Black Bride to your face. That's not a small thing to say to someone here. I'm not telling you to be afraid. I'm telling you to be careful. Families like that don't lose gracefully. Hana thought about that conversation for days. She thought about it again the morning a silk-wrapped invitation landed on her desk, Madame Yoon's warm handwriting pressed into every careful word. She should have called Juin before she went. In the Choi household, they had a name for her, Jeomun Sinbu, the Black Bride. An aunt said it in the hallway like it was just a fact, the same way you'd say tall bride, or foreign bride. Choi Min-jun barely looked at her. He had a girlfriend across the city. He had a reputation to protect. And he had a mother who made it clear, in 100 small ways every day, that Hana was being tolerated, not welcomed. Hana kept working anyway. She kept sketching buildings late into the night, the way her father taught her. She told her younger brother, on video calls, that everything was fine. There was nothing he could do from London, and some stubborn part of her still believed she could simply outlast this family. She didn't know Madame Yoon had already decided the wedding would never happen. Not through breaking a contract, which would shame the family. Through making Hana leave on her own. Quietly. No scandal, no broken promises on paper. Just a foreign bride who decided, one day, that she couldn't take it anymore. Madame Yoon had 3 days left to make that happen. She'd already chosen exactly where to do it. 3 days later, at the family estate, it began. The first stone, wrapped tight in white chrysanthemums, left someone's hand and landed in the grass an inch from Hana's knee. She felt cold mist rolling off the koi pond behind her. She smelled crushed flowers and wet stone. 40 guests stood in a loose half-circle around her, champagne catching the last orange light of evening. For one foolish second, she let herself believe this really was just a strange old custom. Then the second stone hit her shoulder, hard. She didn't cry out. Her father raised her better than that. The third caught her arm and split the skin open. Warm blood ran down to her wrist before the pain even registered. A young cousin near the terrace wound up his throw like he was aiming at a fair booth. The stone caught her above the eyebrow. White light exploded behind her eyes. The whole garden tilted sideways. She went down. Somewhere behind her, a camera shutter clicked. Then another. Guests were taking pictures. Madame Yoon's voice floated somewhere above her. Calm, almost bored. She'll understand. Better she leaves now than be embarrassed later. 40 people. Not one of them moved. So Hana did the only thing her body would still let her do. She crawled. Through wet grass, through white petals turning pink with her own blood, toward the dark line of hedges where the party lights couldn't reach. That's when she saw him. A shape standing perfectly still in the shadows, watching the whole garden the way a man watches something he's already decided about. He crossed that lawn in under 10 seconds. He didn't look at the terrace. He didn't look at Madame Yoon, already going pale and stammering something about hired help. He knelt beside Hana. He checked the cut above her eye with 2 careful fingers. Then he lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing at all. Then he walked, straight through 40 wedding guests, without slowing once. Nobody stopped him. Nobody even thought to ask his name. They had no idea who this man was. They had no idea he was about to make every single one of them regret this night for years. A monitor beeped softly somewhere to her left. Hana opened her eyes to sunlight pouring through tall windows. Nothing like the harsh garden lights from that night. The sheets under her hands were soft, expensive. Nothing like the Choi guest wing. A nurse in clean scrubs checked a small screen near the bed. She explained, gently, that Hana had 6 stitches above her eyebrow. A mild concussion. Bruising along both arms. But she was safe. Completely safe. Safe. A strange word to trust after that garden. Jo-eun found out 2 days later, from a one-line text Hana finally sent from a borrowed phone. I'm okay. Long story. Jo-eun called back within 30 seconds. When Hana picked up, The first thing she heard was her friend exhaling, like she'd been holding her breath for 2 days straight. "I told you to be careful," Joan said, voice cracking somewhere between relief and anger. "I told you." "You did," Hana admitted. "I should have listened." "Who found you?" Hana looked toward the closed door, where she could hear quiet footsteps in the hallway outside. "I don't actually know yet," she said, "but I think I'm about to." 2 days passed before the man who carried her finally appeared. He stood in the doorway instead of walking in, like he was giving her room to breathe. He didn't apologize. There was nothing to apologize for. It wasn't his doing. He didn't ask for thanks either. He simply asked one question. "Do you remember me?" Hana studied his face. The thin scar above his left eyebrow, the particular stillness in how he stood, like he was always ready to move but chose not to. And slowly, a memory she'd buried for 14 years rose back to the surface. A rooftop in Lagos. A sketchbook. A serious boy who never wasted a word. "You," she whispered. "You actually came. I told you I would. That was 14 years ago. You were 17. He looked at her with the exact same seriousness he'd had on that rooftop, all those years ago. "I don't make promises I don't keep," he said. "Ask my father." She didn't know yet that his father was already dead. She didn't know what kind of man this boy had grown into, and she had no idea what was coming. The promise he made on a Lagos rooftop was about to turn her entire life upside down, all over again. To understand why he said that with such certainty, you have to go back 14 years. Hana's father had just won his very first major contract, a port project that could have made his small company famous. But a rival sabotaged the deal. Officials got bribed, papers disappeared, and when paperwork wasn't enough, someone arranged for Adeyemi to have what looked like a very serious accident. He survived. Barely. His company was 3 weeks from collapse. That's when a Korean shipping businessman named Kang Sung-min arrived in Lagos for an unrelated deal and heard about it. Sung-min wasn't a kind man by nature. He was careful. He studied Adeyemi once, quickly and completely, the way he studied everyone, and decided this man was worth saving. He paid off the creditors. He redirected enough shipping business to stabilize the company within a year. In return, he asked for one thing, that if the Kang family ever needed something from the Adeyemis, the debt would be honored, no matter how much time passed. What neither father planned for was their children. Kang Sung-min's son, Taeo, was 17, dragged along and bored out of his mind. Adeyemi's daughter, Hana, was 15, sharp-tongued, always sketching buildings in the margins of her notebooks. She was completely unimpressed by the serious boy forced to sit through her father's dinner parties. For 3 weeks they were thrown together, first with annoyance, then with the kind of intensity only teenagers manage, building something neither of them had words for yet. On his last night in Lagos, Taeo found her on the rooftop, sketching the skyline under the stars. The city noise drifted up from the street below, horns, music from a passing car, the smell of fried plantain from a stall on the corner. He didn't say anything poetic. He was 17, raised by a man who believed wasted words were a weakness. "Why me?" Hana asked, only half joking. "You've barely said 10 words to me all week." "I don't talk to people I don't intend to keep," he said. "If you're ever in real trouble," he said, "find me. I'll come." Hana laughed, certain she'd never see him again. "Don't make promises you won't remember." He looked at her, dead serious. "I don't make promises I don't keep." Then he left. Letters slowly stopped, the way they always do. Hana grew up into an architect, exactly like her sketches always promised. Tae grew up faster, into a much harder world than she could have imagined. A world she wouldn't understand until it was standing in her hospital room, asking if she remembered him. He'd remembered every word of that promise for 14 years. And the moment his people found her name attached to a Choi marriage contract, he didn't hesitate. Not for one single day. The Choi family didn't learn the truth quickly. For 3 days, they assumed the foreign bride had simply left, scared off exactly as planned. The problem, as Madame Yoon called her privately, had solved itself with minimal mess. Then one phone call changed that. A business associate in Busan asked Choi Min-jun's father a careful, sideways question. The kind men ask when they already suspect the answer. Had the Choi Group recently done business with the Baeko Group? White Tiger. A name spoken in Seoul's business circles only in hushed tones. The way people talk about something dangerous they'd rather not look at directly. On the surface, shipping, logistics, real estate, even a charity foundation with its name on hospital wings across the city. Underneath that surface, the largest, most disciplined criminal network on the entire Korean peninsula. Smuggling routes through 3 ports. A debt collection division that never needed to collect twice. Politicians who owed favors they'd never admit to, even to their own families. At the top of it all, Kang Tae-oh, 34 years old. He'd inherited the organization 6 years earlier and quietly tripled its reach while making it almost invisible. The hired security who'd walked through their estate, carrying away their humiliated bride, was the single most dangerous man in Seoul. None of those 40 guests had ever stood this close to him before. Inside the Baeko Group's own offices, the news of Taeo's decision moved just as fast. His second-in-command, a careful, loyal man named Officer Han, asked him directly if this was worth it, claiming a foreign architect as his wife. The attention it would bring. "This isn't business," Han said. "I understand business. This is something else." "It's a debt," Tae-oh said, not looking up from his desk. "My father's word. It's mine now. You didn't have to make it this visible." Tae-oh finally looked up. Something in his face made even Han take a small step back. "They threw stones at her," he said, "wrapped in flowers, so it would look beautiful in photographs. I'm done being quiet about people who hurt others and call it tradition." Han didn't ask again. Choi Min-jun's father didn't sleep that night. Something underneath his family had shifted, and he had no idea yet how deep that shift went. He found out 3 days later. In his own office. 11th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows built to make people feel small. It didn't work that day. Kang Tae-oh walked in without an appointment. He didn't knock. He sat down before anyone invited him to. He set a single folder on the desk and looked at Min-jun like a man reading out the weather. "Your family runs 3 falsified construction permits through shell companies in Incheon," he said. "I know which ones. I know which inspectors you've been paying. I haven't decided yet if that's useful to me. That depends on the next 5 minutes." Min-jun tried to bluster, tried to ask who let this man into his building. Tae-oh let him finish, then continued like he hadn't spoken at all. "The marriage contract is void, as of this morning. I've already paid off, in full, with interest, the debt your father was using as leverage, from an account you'll never trace back to me." He leaned forward. Just slightly. The only aggressive thing he did in the whole conversation, and it was enough. "She's not your bride anymore. She's not your mother's tradition to weaponize. As of this morning, she's under my protection. I'd think very carefully about what that means going forward." Min-jun had spent his entire life as the most powerful person in any room. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be the least powerful person in one. "And the photographs from the estate," Tae-oh added, sliding a second folder across the desk, almost like an afterthought. "The ones meant to look like flower petals instead of stones. I have copies. So does a journalist I trust. Whether they're ever published depends entirely on how your family behaves from here." He stood, buttoned his coat, left without waiting for a response. He hadn't come to negotiate. He'd come to inform. Min-jun sat alone in his office for a long time after the door closed, staring at the 2 folders Tae-oh left behind. Then he finally picked up the phone to call his mother. His hand wasn't quite steady when he dialed. Word moved through Seoul's wealthiest circles faster than anyone in the Choi family could control. "Did you hear about the Choi wedding? The bride is gone." "No. Not gone. Taken." "Taken by who?" "They're saying it was Kang Tae-oh himself. Walked right onto the estate and carried her out in front of everyone." Within a week, 3 families quietly canceled meetings with the Choi Group. 2 investors developed sudden, urgent reasons to delay. Nobody said why directly. Nobody needed to. In Seoul's highest circles, everyone understood that crossing the Baeko Group, even by accident, wasn't a risk worth taking twice. Madame Yoon felt the change first in small, humiliating ways. A seat no longer saved for her at a charity luncheon. A phone call left unreturned for 2 full days. A smile from an old friend that didn't quite reach the eyes anymore. Inside the Choi townhouse, Min-jun finally confronted his mother, slamming a folder of his own onto the dinner table. "You knew," he said. "You knew exactly who he was, didn't you?" "I knew a man came," Madame Yoon said, not flinching. "I didn't know which man. You planned the whole night. The stones, the tradition. You wanted her gone, and you didn't care how." "I wanted this family protected," she snapped. "You think I enjoyed any part of that night? I did what needed doing. You nearly got us destroyed by the most dangerous man in Seoul." He was right, though neither of them knew yet exactly how right. For the first time in his marriage, Min-jun's father looked at his wife differently. He wasn't entirely certain how much of his family's fortune had been built on things he'd simply chosen not to ask about. The Choi family had survived scandals before, always by standing together. This time, the cracks had already started forming on the inside, long before any of it ever reached a newspaper. The days that followed were quiet, in a way Hana hadn't felt in weeks. Teo didn't push her to talk. He checked on her once a day, made sure she had what she needed, and otherwise gave her room to heal. Slowly, over tea. Over takeout containers spread across his kitchen counter, rain ticking softly against the window glass. They started talking again, the way two people do when they're rebuilding something interrupted 14 years ago and never finished. She asked about his father's death. He told her, in short, careful sentences, about inheriting a world he never asked for. He didn't dramatize it. He just told her the truth, the same way he always had, even as a teenager. One evening, she found him on the same terrace where he'd questioned Officer Han. He stood with his back to the city. A single glass of water sat untouched on the railing beside him. "You don't drink," she said. More observation than question. "My father did. It never made him calmer. Just slower to react." He glanced sideways at her. "I noticed early that I didn't want to be slower to react." She almost smiled. "Is that why you came for me in under 10 seconds? "That," he said, "and 14 years of practice not forgetting things." Something old between them began waking back up, not the fast, intense thing they'd felt as teenagers. Something slower, steadier. But Hana hadn't forgotten the real reason she came to Seoul. Her father's company, the debt, and a discrepancy she'd noticed in building records weeks before that night at the estate. A discrepancy that had nothing to do with her marriage, and everything to do with the Choi family's true business. She'd had privileged access to Choi Group building plans and safety files for weeks, through her architecture firm, and architects notice things other people miss. Buried inside an inspection report for a tower in Incheon, under the cold fluorescent hum of the records office, she found a structural shortcut, hidden behind clean paperwork, a safety certification that didn't match the actual materials used. She checked the date twice. She checked the engineer's signature against 3 other reports. It didn't match either. She kept looking. A second building, the same pattern, different signature, same missing inspection date. A third, a fourth, a residential complex in Mapo where 200 families currently slept above concrete that had never been properly tested. Then she found something that stopped her completely. A commercial complex, built 9 years earlier, near the same port where her father lost his first major contract. The original safety failure had been quietly blamed on a small subcontractor that no longer existed. A subcontractor that had once competed against her father for the exact same deal. The sabotage that nearly destroyed her father's company hadn't come from some anonymous rival. It had come from the Chois. Years before anyone had ever said the words arranged marriage. She told no one. Not Min-jun, not Madame Yoon, not even Teo, not yet. One night, weeks before the estate, she stayed late in the Choi Group's records office, officially reviewing blueprints, unofficially photographing 9-year-old safety files. The air conditioning hummed overhead. Her phone sat face down on the table, silent. Her hands stayed steady, her breathing didn't. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, slow, unhurried. She slid the folder back into its drawer and closed it without a sound, just as the door opened. A junior compliance officer. He barely glanced at her, asked if she needed the lights left on. She smiled, said no thank you. She didn't let her hands shake until she was 3 floors down, alone in her car, engine off, just breathing. She found her journalist through Juun, a woman named Seo Ha-young. who'd built her entire career writing stories powerful families wished she'd never started. They met in the back corner of a small noodle shop, steam fogging the windows, far from anywhere their names might be recognized. Ha-young listened for almost 2 hours, flipping through page after page, her face giving nothing away. "Do you understand what happens after I publish this?" she finally asked. "Not to the Chwas. To you. I've already survived the worst thing they could think to do to me," Hana said. "I'd rather survive standing up than hiding." Ha-young studied her, then nodded slowly, like Hana had passed some quiet test. "They don't fight fair. They'll try to discredit you, maybe even me. Be ready before we start, not after." "I'm ready," Hana said. She wasn't. Not entirely. Nobody ever really is. She told Tayo everything that same week, sliding her own folder across his kitchen table, the way he'd slid his, across Minjun's desk. He went quiet for a long moment. "You've had this the whole time." "I didn't need you to fight my battle for me," Hana said. "I needed somewhere safe to finish building the case. That's different." Something close to a smile crossed his face. "My father always said your father was the most stubborn man he ever helped. I think he underestimated the daughter." What followed wasn't a rescue story anymore. It became a partnership. His network tracing the money, her evidence giving it shape. Real documents. Real forged signatures. Real proof that ordinary people's lives had been quietly put at risk to protect a wealthy family's profits. "If we do this your way," Hana told him, "it disappears the moment you stop watching it. If we do it my way, it's permanent. On record. They can threaten a person. They can't threaten a public safety board." He didn't argue. What Hana didn't know yet was that Teo had already put 2 of his own people on her. Quietly, every day, since she started meeting Ha-young. A car, 2 streets back. A face in the coffee shop across from her office that never ordered the same drink twice. She never noticed them. That was the point. But Madame Yoon wasn't finished fighting. When whispers reached her that Hana had been meeting privately with a journalist, she made 2 phone calls. The first, to a lawyer, quietly moving funds offshore. The second was far more dangerous. She called a man with connections far less careful than Teo's, asking him to make Hana's investigation disappear quietly, by whatever means he believed necessary. 3 nights later, leaving her office later than usual, Hana noticed a car behind her. Headlights too close in her mirror. Following the same turns, 2 streets in a row, far too deliberate to be coincidence. She didn't panic. She turned down a busy street instead of a quiet one. She walked straight into a crowded convenience store, the bell over the door jangling behind her, and called Teo the second she was safely inside. He arrived in under 6 minutes. By then the car was already gone, not because its driver lost interest, but because Teo's own people had intercepted it 2 streets away. That night, sitting across from him, his face harder than she'd ever seen it, he told her exactly how close she'd come. "They sent someone after you," he said. "Tonight, while I was 2 streets behind, watching the whole time." The floor tilted slightly under her. "Madame Yoon? I'll know for certain by morning," he said, "but I already know." Teo had been patient until now. That patience had just run out completely. By morning, he had his confirmation. The man following her worked for a debt collector tied to Madame Yoon's lawyer, the kind who specialized in making inconvenient people disappear quietly. No police report ever filed. He didn't tell her everything. Some details, he decided, she didn't need to carry. He went straight to the hospital room of the Choi family's elderly patriarch instead. The man who'd called in the marriage contract out of nothing more than habit. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old paper. A single lamp lit the corner where the old man lay, tubes taped to the back of one thin hand. Tayo sat beside the bed, the monitor beeping steadily, his voice quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "Your wife sent someone after the woman under my protection," he said. "I want you absolutely certain what happens if anyone tries that again." The old man's eyes moved slowly toward him, tired. For one brief second, something that might have been shame crossed his face. He had called in that old contract out of habit. He never once imagined it would lead a man like this into his hospital room. He didn't threaten violence directly. He didn't need to. He laid out, calmly, Exactly how much of the Choi Group's hidden history he now controlled. How many falsified permits? How many bribed officials? How many shell companies he could expose with one phone call? I've been patient because of an old debt my father left me, Teo said. That debt is between our families, not yours and mine. If anything happens to Hana, anything at all, the patience ends, and what I do next won't look like patience anymore. The old man promised it wouldn't happen again. He kept that promise, but the fear in Hana's eyes that night couldn't be undone with words. It only made her more determined to finish what she'd started. 3 weeks later, everything she'd built was finally ready. It was time to bring it all out, in front of the very people who'd once thrown stones at her. The Choi Group's annual shareholder gala was, every year, exactly the kind of event Madame Yoon spent decades building. Glass walls, the Han River glittering below, photographers crowding the entrance, a string quartet playing something nobody really listened to. Hana walked in not as the humiliated foreign bride, but as a guest of the journalist who'd broken the story that very morning. Front page. Falsified safety certifications across 5 Choi developments. Financial records. A clear timeline tracing the deliberate sabotage of her father's company, nearly 15 years earlier. Engineered, from the very beginning, by the same family that later pretended to save him. Madame Yoon was mid-toast, champagne raised, smiling for the cameras. Her phone started lighting up with calls she didn't have time to answer. Reporters were already gathering outside the doors. Minjun's father, pale, visibly shaking, tried explaining something to a room full of stunned shareholders. Why structural engineers were being rushed that very night to 4 occupied buildings across the city. Hana watched the same 40 faces from that garden scatter through the crowd. No longer laughing, no longer holding champagne with easy confidence. The cousin who'd thrown the stone that split her eyebrow stood near the bar, suddenly very interested in his phone. The aunt who'd called her the black bride to her face was already being steered out a side door, away from the cameras. Business partners who'd spent years attaching their names to the Choi family for prestige backed away from Madame Yoon in real time, the way people back away from a fire before it reaches them. A waiter near the kitchen doors lowered his tray and simply stopped working, watching the room unravel like everyone else. Somewhere near the string quartet, a violin note hung in the air, a half-second too long, before the musician lost his place entirely. Minjun found her near the edge of the ballroom, his usual confidence gone. "You did this," he said. Not quite an accusation. "You did this," Hana corrected him. "Years before I ever arrived. I just made sure everyone finally saw it." "I didn't know about any of it," he said. "The permits. What they did to your father. I swear I didn't know." She looked at him, not with hate, but something closer to tired pity. "Maybe that's true. But you knew about the stones, Minjun. You stood on that terrace and watched. Not knowing isn't the same as doing nothing." He had no answer for that. She found Madame Yoon once more before the night ended, while reporters swirled outside like a storm finally arriving. "You called it a purification ritual," Hana said quietly. "I think you'll find the press has a different word for what happens when a family builds its fortune on cut corners and broken people." She let the silence sit there. "They're calling it negligence tonight," she said. "I think by next week, they'll call it fraud." Then she turned and walked away, leaving Madame Yoon standing alone in the middle of her own collapsing party. The Choi Group didn't collapse overnight. Companies that size rarely do, but it bled badly for a long time after. 2 executives were indicted within the month. The patriarch stepped back from public life completely. Minjun inherited a company worth a fraction of what it used to be, and a family name that no longer opened the doors it once did. Hana's father's company, finally free of any debt to the Choi, won its first fully independent major contract in over a decade. Fittingly, a structural safety consultancy. Built entirely on the reputation Hana earned, exposing exactly the kind of negligence her father had spent his whole career refusing to engage in. Ha Young's article won an award that year. Juan framed the front page and hung it above her own desk, where Hana could see it every time she walked past. In London, her younger brother called the morning. The story broke worldwide, his voice shaking with something between disbelief and pride. 40 people work for that company because of what you just did," he said. 40 families, Hana. Dad would have framed the newspaper. Officer Han, of all people, sent her a short message that week too. Just one line. My father would have liked you. Hana read it twice before she understood what it was. The closest thing to a welcome she was ever going to get from that part of Teo's world. And it was enough. Months later, on the terrace of Teo's penthouse, the city lights spread out below them the same way Lagos once had, all those years ago. You never told me, Hana said, leaning against the railing beside him. What you would have done if I'd shown up 15 years later. If you'd already forgotten me completely. Tithe considered the question with the same seriousness he'd given it at 17. I didn't forget for 14 years, he said. I'm not going to start now. And if I'd married Minjun? If you'd arrived too late? I wasn't going to arrive too late. I decided that before I ever set foot in Seoul. She studied his face in the city light. You really are exactly the same person you were at 17. No, he said, and something like a real smile reached his eyes. I'm the same, promise. Everything else changed. She didn't laugh, the way she had on a different rooftop, in a different country, half a lifetime ago. She just stood there beside him, in a silence that didn't need filling anymore. He reached over, without a word, and laced his fingers through hers. Below them, the city kept moving. Lights, traffic, 1,000 other lives, none of them knowing what it took to get two people back to the same rooftop. 14 years and one promise later. She didn't let go. If this story hit you somewhere, drop a comment and subscribe for more Afro Mafia Romance Chronicles stories where karma always finds its way home. Thanks for watching. Don't forget I read every comment.